Israel has fought at least 5 wars with Hamas over the past 17 years. These wars did not bring peace and security to Israel. What makes you think you will succeed this time around?
So this is different. We've stated a goal that we have never stated in the past, and that is to end Hamas's control over the Gaza Strip. And so the goal of the operation is to create a new reality in Gaza. No people, not Norwegians, not Israelis, should have to live in a reality where there's a constant fear of terrorists crossing the frontier and killing their children in the middle of the night.
You've said that your fight is against Hamas. According to the UN, international rights groups, most experts on this issue say the root cause of the conflict between Israel and Palestine is not Hamas. It's your occupation of Palestinian land and the oppression of Palestinians.
Not true.
Not true.
Historically, there were repeated examples where a Palestinian state was on the table. You can go back to the 1936 Peel proposals during the period of British control. You can go to the 1947 partition proposals. You can talk about the ideas of Palestinian self-rule that were discussed at Camp David between Begin and Sadat. You can go to the proposals that Ehud Barak put on the table. You can talk about the proposals that Ehud Olmert put on the table.
Let's move on to the bombing campaign inside Gaza. According to an investigation by Amnesty International, and I'm quoting, Israeli forces have shown a shocking disregard for civilian lives. They have pulverized street after street of residential buildings, killing civilians on a mass scale.
I reject the accusation. Before starting our military campaign against Hamas, we made a maximum effort, and it's been documented, to encourage civilians to leave the war zone. And we leafleted and we did other things, and the truth is the overwhelming majority of civilians in northern Gaza heeded our advice and moved south out of the combat zone.
The Israeli forces bombed a market in Jabalia refugee camp north of Gaza City, killing at least 50 people.
According to the Hamas-controlled Ministry of Health.
What was the aim of this attack?
On that day, our forces were shot at, we exchanged fire, we took casualties on that day. And yet the Hamas Ministry of Health wants you to believe, and maybe you are gullible enough to believe, that out of the blue Israel attacked a civilian target for no reason. This is ridiculous.
It's the way you attack, sir. I'm going to get to that, okay? So, according to the IDF, there was a Hamas commander inside the camp who was the main target, and many people got killed, let's say that. The IDF...
But were they civilians or were they...
you tell us, how many Hamas commanders and fighters have you killed in the war?
Thousands.
Thousands.
Correct.
How do you know they're Hamas fighters and not civilians?
So, obviously, in any war situation, it's difficult to know exactly, but we are...
But how can you state that there are thousands?
We know that. That's our estimation.
The IDF has some of the world's most advanced precision-guided weapons
Thank
systems.
goodness we do, because we face formidable enemies.
We have seen you use these weapons in previous fights where you can target a single Hamas commander in his car, even in his apartment in a multi-story building. Yet, in this war, you have razed whole neighborhoods in your bombing. Why is that?
Hamas has embedded itself deliberately under the civilian population. And we must destroy Hamas. And so we've asked civilians to leave the area, and the overwhelming majority of civilians have heeded our advice and left. And that allows us to take on Hamas.
Mr. Regev, you talk as if there's places to hide from the bombs in Gaza. You tell people to go to southern parts of Gaza, and then your Air Force bombs areas in the south, killing people there. Where should people go?
So that we have designated, there's an answer to that question. We have shared with the Americans and the United Nations specific zones, which are safe zones. They're in the south. Mostly
this is totally new to me. When did you share these zones?
A week ago, when we started talking about moving to the south, because up
until
now...
A week ago, so you've been bombing for 6 weeks.
Mainly in the north.
Then you provide safe zones?
When you're in a difficult war situation, it's all about managing risk. And so by telling people leave the north and move south, we're actually managing risk. They are much safer in the south than in the north. Now the combat is moving into the south, we're being even more specific, and we're giving specifically designated areas where we're asking civilians to go to.
90% of the bombs you've dropped on Gaza have been 500 to 1,000 kilograms each, according to military experts quoted by the Times. These bombs have caused extreme death and destruction. How can Israel claim that its forces are avoiding civilian casualties, as you say, while dropping tens of thousands of these massive bombs?
So we are bombing Hamas infrastructure. We're bombing Hamas's military machine. We're trying to be as surgical as is humanly possible, differentiating between Hamas, who is our vicious enemy, and the civilians who we're not trying to hurt.
Mr. Regev, have you seen the pictures from Gaza?
Of course. But I would tell you,
I have to say something, surgical attacks?
I have seen...
Have you seen the drone pictures of the massive destruction?
But once again, these are targets that Hamas has turned into a war zone. Hamas commits a double war crime, and this must be said. Not only does Hamas attack and massacre Israeli civilians, a war crime, because you're supposed to attack military targets and not civilians, yes? But by using Gaza's civilians as a human shield for its war machine, this is also under the Geneva Convention a war crime.
I'm glad you brought up the issue of war crimes, because international rights groups say Hamas and Israel should be investigated for war crimes. Will Israel allow investigators from the International Criminal Court to enter Gaza?
So we are not committing war crimes. We believe our behavior, we know our behavior conforms with international standards of warfare. And we've leafleted, and we gave like 3-4 weeks before the actual ground forces entered northern Gaza. The fact that even after combat starts, we make a clear differentiation between combatants who are our enemy, and they are a brutal and vicious enemy, Hamas, and the civilian population.
For 2 months, you and the Egyptians have denied international press access to the Gaza Strip. In Egypt's case, it figures. It's a dictatorship. There is no freedom of press there. Israel, on the other hand, prides itself as the only democracy in the Middle East. Why won't you allow journalists to enter Gaza?
It's a war zone. It's very dangerous. We do press enter when it's feasible for us.
But it's on your terms. It's an embed with IDF.
Because it's a combat zone.
How can we know that what you are saying is true when you don't allow international observers, where you don't allow international press?
Check me.
How can we check? We're not on the ground. We're not on the ground with you.
You are invited to join one of our press.
Where you decide where we go, who we talk to, what we film, and you control our footage.
On the contrary, if the BBC did it, if CNN did it, yes? It's not professional. Of course it's professional.
But is that your definition of how free press should operate?
I would say to you...
With all those constraints?
I would say to you that Israel is known for having a free press.
The democratic state of Israel is controlling half of Gaza. Why don't you allow us to go
it's
in
still
there,
a war
in your
zone.
areas?
It's still a war zone.
We can take care of our security.
Sorry. We have a responsibility. We don't allow civilians into a war zone. That would be irresponsible.
Let's move on. You talked about the displaced people. The war has forced 1.7 million Gazans from their homes. Why won't you allow them back to their homes in northern Gaza?
Because it's still a war zone. And we say when the fighting is over, people can return. Of course they can.
Palestinians in Gaza claim Israel has a more sinister plan of displacing them. Is this true?
Hamas propaganda.
Why then did your intelligence ministry draft a wartime proposal right after you invaded Gaza to transfer Gaza's 2.2 million people to Egypt's Sinai Peninsula?
So we have a large bureaucracy, and the job of the bureaucracy is to produce papers and to think ideas, to come up with ideas. And
why come up with such an idea?
So it's not government policy, but it's the job of people.
Anyway, if you say it's not part of your plan, why?
It's not policy.
But why, if it's not your plan to displace people from Gaza to Egypt, why has your boss, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, been lobbying the EU to pressure Egypt into accepting refugees from Gaza, according to the Financial Times?
So we would urge all countries to accept refugees from Gaza. We think that's the humane thing to do.
So you have been lobbying the EU to accept
We've been urging all countries to accept Palestinian refugees, and even if they're just to accept people to go to hospitals and things. We think that's part of our goal, which is not to see innocent civilians caught up in the crossfire. This is humanitarian. Why are you making it sinister?
Because they fear they will never be able to come back.
We will give guarantees that people can come back.
So you guarantee that?
Yes.
The Israeli website Ynet has reported that your government has offered to pay off a chunk of Egypt's foreign debt in exchange for accepting Gazan refugees. Is this true?
All I can say is we've been urging all countries to accept refugees from the conflict precisely because we don't want to see innocent civilians caught up in the crossfire.
Have you offered this to Egypt?
We've talked to many countries about different things.
Let's talk a bit about beyond the war in Gaza. What do you see as the solution to this decade-long conflict between the Israelis and Palestinians?
So when the war in Gaza is over and Hamas is defeated and destroyed, So we'd like to see a Gaza that is demilitarized and a Gaza that is de-radicalized. Ultimately, Hamas has been running the Gaza Strip for 16 years, and what do they have to show for it? What have they brought the people of Gaza? Hardship, bloodshed, suffering, and poverty.
So you want to give the people of Gaza a better future?
Correct, 100%.
Don't you think that the thousands of Palestinians who have lost loved ones, who have lost everything they have on earth, will have an enormous amount of resentment and hatred towards the Israelis after your war?
The opposite is true.
Really?
Yes. When this is over, I understand that the people of Gaza have historical animosities towards Israelis. I understand that. But they are human beings who can think. And they know who started this war. They know who initiated this war. They know who brought this catastrophe upon them.
I was asking you about the overarching solution to this conflict, and that's bigger than Hamas. So
Correct.
I want to ask you up front, should the Palestinians have the right to self-determination, to an independent Palestine?
So our position of the Prime Minister, Netanyahu, is that the Palestinians should have all the powers to govern themselves and none of the powers to threaten Israel. That's a complicated formula. We pulled out of the Gaza Strip in 2005, and the whole international community applauded us. We took down all the settlements to the very last one. We went back to the 1967 line, which people in Europe say is the legitimate international border. There is no reason whatsoever for conflict between Israel and Gaza.
But you failed to mention that you imposed one of the harshest blockades on earth. Gaza was turned into, according to the UN and rights groups, into the largest open-air prison. You decide what goes in, what goes out, who moves in, who moves out. You control the air, you control the sea, and then you expect them to live in peace side by side with you?
You forget one small fact. We imposed restrictions on movement in and out of Gaza only after Hamas took control and only after they declared war on us and started to use the Gaza Strip as a platform for military operations against Israel.
So in your fight against Hamas, it's fine that 2.2 million people suffer?
And when the world fought Nazi Germany, a blockade was imposed on Germany by the British. This was a war crime?
You don't see this as collective punishment?
No, it's according to international law.
Do you accept the right of a Palestine, independent Palestine, to exist alongside Israel?
All the powers for Palestinians to rule themselves?
It's a very simple question, sir.
Yes, I'm answering you.
Yeah.
All the powers to rule themselves, to govern themselves, none of the powers that could hurt us.
It sounds like you are accepting a Palestinian state on your terms, so there is no self-determination for the Palestinians.
Isn't the problem, though, as we've discussed before, the denial of the Jewish people's right to self-determination? Because if Palestinians say that my country is an illegitimate colonialist creation, which is what even Palestinian moderates will say, they are denying the Jewish people the right to self-determination. But if you say the Jewish state has no right to exist in any border...
No, but not all Palestinians say that, sir. Not all Palestinians claim that, okay? The Palestinian Authority, who has a peace deal with you, who is running the West Bank, there is no Hamas ruling the West Bank. Why are you oppressing Palestinians in the West Bank? Why are your forces rounding up hundreds of young men, arresting them? Why have over 200 Palestinians been killed in the West Bank in the past 7 weeks? Why are you expanding the occupation?
First of all, there's Hamas across the West Bank. There are Hamas cells across the West Bank who want to commit the sort of atrocities that were committed against Israel on October 7th. They want to go into Israeli communities and they want to butcher people. And so we are preempting and we are trying to arrest people and take out terrorists. This is self-defense.
So you defend the operations in the West Bank, the raids.
Of course. They are designed.
The killings, the arrests.
When you say, when we arrest Hamas people, of course that's a good thing.
You've arrested children as well, sir. 14-year-old boys.
Sorry, anyone who's interested in Palestinian children and their well-being should be asking about the manipulation of minors by terrorist groups who deliberately exploit the naivety of teenagers, 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, sometimes younger, as you say, and urge them to be involved in violence, in stabbings, in shootings, and so forth. This is a tragedy, but this is ultimately the responsibility of the terrorist groups that deliberately brutalize children. We don't want to see children involved in combat.
Tamir Pardo, a former Mossad chief, recently said Israel is enforcing an apartheid system in the West Bank. He said, and I quote, In a territory where two people are judged under two legal systems, that is an apartheid state. How would you respond to that?
So the factual part is correct. In other words, there is Israeli law for Israeli citizens. And
settlers who are living there illegally according to international law.
We don't obviously accept that, but there's Israeli law for Israeli citizens and Palestinians living there under military law. But if you make one legal system, there's a word for that. That's called annexation, which the international community opposes and most Israelis don't want to do.
So you prefer military rule over the Palestinians?
As a temporary solution until we can find permanent agreements, I can't see an alternative. It is illogical to say to Israelis, you're not allowed to annex, but you've got two legal systems. So what is the alternative? There isn't an alternative. It's like you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. It's not logical.
At the answer, where do you see this going? Seeing it from outside, as a foreigner, we don't see many solutions. You're in the midst of it. Where do you go from here?
So it's difficult sometimes to be optimistic in the middle of a war like this. But our conversations give me hope, our conversations with Arab governments, that once this is over, not only will we find Arab partners that can help in the rebuilding of a peaceful and demilitarized and de-radicalized Gaza, but I believe the circle of peace, which, as you know, has spread extensively over the last few years, it will continue to spread afterwards, and that the hopes for reconciliation between Israel and important Arab states, once this war is behind us, will once again be in high gear.
Mr. Mark Regev, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.